Summer of 1985. You walk into the grocery store your mom has shopped at for 20 years. The butcher knows your name. The bakery smells like fresh rye bread, and the produce section has tomatoes that actually taste like tomatoes. That store doesn't exist anymore, not because it closed, but because it changed. The name stayed on the building, the doors still opened every morning, but somewhere along the way, the butcher counter became a cooler full of pre-packed meat, the bakery started reheating frozen dough, and nobody behind the counter knew your name anymore. Number 14 on this list was once the biggest grocery chain in the entire country, and it fell so hard that people forgot it had ever been good. Number 6 on this list got caught doing something to its meat that made the national evening news. So hit subscribe, because here are 25 grocery store chains that quietly went from quality to cheap junk. Number 25. Dominick's. If you grew up anywhere in Chicagoland, Dominick's was the nicer grocery store, the one your mom went to when she wanted real produce and a butcher who knew his cuts. Dominick DeMatteo started it as a single fruit stand in 1918, and for decades it stayed a family operation that took pride in fresh Italian sausage, a real deli, and bakery bread that came out of the oven on site. Then, in 1998, Safeway bought it, and the corporate playbook came in fast. The local suppliers were dropped for national distribution, the deli counters shrank, and the store brands crept onto every shelf where a quality product used to sit. Shoppers noticed immediately, and they left for Jewel and the new Mariano's in droves. Safeway spent 15 years trying to fix what it had broken, and in 2013 it gave up and closed every Dominick's in the region at once. A 100-year-old Chicago institution was gone, not because people stopped needing groceries, but because the company that bought it stripped out everything that made people choose it. Number 24. Vons. Across Southern California, Vons was the grocery store you could count on. From Los Angeles down through San Diego, a Vons had a full-service meat counter, a seafood case packed on ice, and produce that turned over fast enough to actually be fresh. Charles von der Ahe opened the first one in 1906, and for generations it was simply where Californians shopped. Then Safeway acquired it in 1997, and the slow hollowing began. The butchers behind the counter were replaced with pre-packed cuts trucked in from a central plant. The Safeway store brands elbowed out the names people trusted. Prices crept up while the quality crept down, and the bright, well-staffed stores started to feel tired and thin. Longtime shoppers who remembered when a Vons butcher would trim a roast to order found themselves staring at shrink-wrapped trays under buzzing lights. The name still hangs over hundreds of California storefronts, but ask anyone who shopped there in the 80s, and they will tell you it is not the same store, and it has not been for a long time. Number 23. Shaw's. In New England, Shaw's was the dependable supermarket, the one that had been around longer than almost anything else on the block. George Shaw opened the first store in Maine back in 1860, and for over a century it built a reputation on clean stores, a solid meat department, and staff who actually kept the shelves stocked. Through the 1970s and 1980s, shopping at Shaw's in Boston or Portland meant fresh produce at a fair price. Then the ownership started changing hands. Super Value took over, then Albertsons, and each new corporate parent squeezed a little more out of the stores and put a little less back in. The produce got tired. The meat counters were cut down to coolers. Entire aisles filled up with house brands while the staff that used to keep the place sharp got thinner every year. Customers who had trusted Shaw's their whole lives started driving past it to the market basket down the road, where the food was fresher and cheaper. The Shaw's name survived, but the careful grocer behind it did not. Number 22. Stop and Shop. For decades, Stop and Shop was the big, reliable grocery chain of the Northeast, the place a family from Connecticut to Rhode Island did a full week of shopping without thinking twice. The stores were large and well-run. The meat department had real butchers, and the prices were honest. Then in the 1990s, the Dutch conglomerate Ahold bought it, and the priorities shifted from the customer to the spreadsheet. The full-service counters were quietly converted to self-service cases. The shelves filled with house brands while the trusted names got harder to find. Self-checkout machines replaced cashiers. The staff on the floor thinned out, and the prices drifted higher than the competition, even as the quality slipped. Shoppers who remembered the old Stop and Shop, the one that felt like it was run by people who lived in town, watched it turn into a fluorescent box that always seemed short-staffed. The chain is still enormous, but somewhere under corporate ownership, it stopped being the store people were proud to shop at. Number 21. Genuardi's. Around Philadelphia, Genuardi's was the family grocery store that felt a cut above the rest. The Genuardi family started it as a roadside produce stand in 1920, and for 80 years they ran it the way a family runs something it cares about, with a real bakery, an Italian specialty counter, and produce picked for quality instead of price. People drove past 2 other supermarkets to shop there. Then in 2001, the family sold the chain to Safeway, and the things that made Genuardi's special started disappearing one by one. The specialty counters were cut. The local touch was replaced with the same corporate layout Safeway used everywhere else. The loyal customers drifted away to Wegmans and Giant, and the stores that had once been packed went quiet. Safeway eventually unloaded the remaining locations to Giant, and by 2012, the Genuardi's name was gone for good. Another family-built grocer that took 3 generations to earn its reputation, erased in barely a decade by owners who treated it as just another set of buildings. Number 20. Red Owl. If you grew up in Minnesota, Wisconsin, or the Dakotas in the 1960s and 1970s, you knew Red Owl. It was a proper neighborhood grocery with a real meat counter, produce stocked by local farmers, and prices that regular families could handle. Red Owl stores were small enough that the manager waved at you when you came in and asked about your kids on the way out. By the late 1970s, the chain started expanding too fast and cutting corners to keep up with the big national competitors. The produce quality dropped. The meat section shrank to a single refrigerator case. The stores that had once felt like your neighbor's shop started feeling like a warehouse with fluorescent lighting and nobody at the register who recognized your face. By 1988, the Red Owl name was gone entirely, absorbed into other chains that cared even less about what had made it special. Number 19. Colonial Stores. Across the southeastern United States, Colonial Stores was the grocery chain your grandmother trusted. From the 1940s through the 1960s, Colonial ran clean, well-organized stores with in-house bakeries and real butcher counters staffed by men who wore white aprons and trimmed your roast while you waited. They carried brand-name goods and had employees who stayed for decades. You could walk in on a Saturday and the same woman who had rung up your groceries 5 years ago was still at the register, still calling you by name. Then the company started chasing growth. They opened bigger locations, switched to cheaper suppliers, and tried to compete on price instead of quality. The stores got messier. The service got worse. By the early 1970s, Colonial was bought out, and the name eventually disappeared. Most people in Georgia and the Carolinas can still remember when Colonial was the place you went because the meat was always fresh and the bread was baked that morning. Number 18. National Tea Company. In the 1950s, National Tea was one of the 5 biggest grocery chains in America. They had stores across the Midwest and the East Coast, and they were known for a simple promise: quality food at honest prices. Your mother could walk into a National Tea store in Chicago or Detroit and know exactly what she was getting. The produce was inspected, the shelves were full, the floors were clean. Then the company went on a buying spree in the 1960s, swallowing up smaller chains without properly managing them. Store conditions became wildly inconsistent. Some locations still ran well, but others started stocking cheaper goods and letting standards slide. By the late 1970s, National Tea had shrunk to a fraction of its former size, and the stores that remained bore almost no resemblance to the chain that had once rivaled A&P. Number 17. Alpha Beta. If you lived in Southern California in the 1960s and 1970s, Alpha Beta was your store. The chain was known for neat, well-lit aisles, quality produce from California's Central Valley, and a meat department that actually trimmed and cut on site. Families in Los Angeles, San Diego, and the Inland Empire made it their regular stop for decades. You could smell the citrus from the produce bins the moment you walked through the door. Then in the 1980s, the chain started struggling against bigger competitors. They sold to a series of different owners, each one cutting costs a little deeper. The produce quality slipped. The butcher counter closed in location after location. By the time Lucky Stores absorbed what remained of Alpha Beta in 1995, many of the stores were bare-bones operations with fewer employees and cheaper inventory on the shelves. The name Alpha Beta lived on in Southern California memory long after the quality stopped matching it. Number 16. Waldbaum's. In New York City and across Long Island, Waldbaum's was the store where your grandmother bought challah on Fridays and brisket for the holidays. Founded in 1904, the chain built its reputation on fresh meat, real bakery goods, and a deli counter that knew the difference between a quarter-pound and a half-pound of pastrami. For decades, that reputation held. The men behind the deli counter sliced your cold cuts thin enough to read a newspaper through, and they did it without being asked. Then Waldbaum's was sold to A&P in 1986, and the slide began. The delis got smaller. The bakery switched from scratch-made to delivered. The produce section became an afterthought. By the 2000s, walking into a Waldbaum's felt nothing like the store your grandmother had counted on. When A&P finally collapsed and Waldbaum's closed for good, the name carried more history than the store had delivered in its final 20 years. Number 15. Lucky Stores. Lucky was a California institution from the 1950s through the 1980s. The stores were clean, reliable, and stocked with the kind of produce that only California could supply year-round. They had real butcher shops inside, and the store brand Lucky products were considered decent quality for the price. Then Lucky started merging. They absorbed Alpha Beta. American stores bought them. Then Albertsons swallowed the whole thing. Each merger brought new management, new cost-cutting targets, and new ideas about efficiency, none of which involved keeping the butcher on staff or sourcing produce from local growers. By the time the Lucky name disappeared from most storefronts in the late 1990s, the chain had already become something its original customers would not have recognized. The stores were still there. The feeling of walking in and trusting what you found on the shelves was not. Number 14. A&P. The Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company was, for most of the 20th century, the biggest grocery chain in the United States. At its peak in the 1930s, A&P operated nearly 16,000 stores across the country. Walking into an A&P in the 1950s or 1960s was a specific kind of experience. The produce was fresh. The canned goods were the company's own brands, Ann Page and Jane Parker, and people genuinely trusted them. The bakeries turned out real bread and cakes. A&P was never fancy, but it was solid. You could hand your list to the butcher, go fill the cart, and come back to find your order wrapped and waiting. For millions of American families, A&P was simply where you bought your food. The decline crept in through the 1970s. The company started closing stores in neighborhoods that were not profitable enough. They cut staff. They shrank the fresh departments. Where you once had a butcher who would cut a roast to order, you now had a refrigerator case full of shrink-wrapped trays from a packing plant 200 miles away. The store brand products your mother had trusted started tasting different. The bread was not the same. The coffee was not the same. Management tried rebranding with brighter lighting and wider aisles, but the inventory behind the new paint was still cheap and getting cheaper. By the 1990s, shopping at A&P felt like shopping at a store that had given up on itself, but could not figure out how to close. They filed for bankruptcy in 2010, filed again in 2015, and by the end of that year, the name was gone. 16,000 stores to zero, and the reason was plain. They stopped caring about the food and started caring only about the margins. Number 13. Buy low. If you lived in the Carolinas, Georgia, or Tennessee, Be-Lo was part of your weekly routine. The chain started in the 1960s as a lower-cost alternative to the big names, but it never felt cheap. The stores were clean, the meat was cut in-house, and the produce was sourced from regional farms. For decades, Bilo was the place where working families could buy good groceries without feeling like they were settling. Your dad could pick up a pot roast on Friday afternoon and know it had been trimmed that morning. Then, the ownership changes started. Private equity got involved in the 2000s. The stores started looking tired. The meat department shrank. The shelves had gaps where products used to be. What had once been a solid regional chain became a place you visited because it was close, not because it was good. Bilo filed for bankruptcy, merged with Winn-Dixie, and most of its remaining stores were either rebranded or closed altogether. Number 12. Acme Markets. Acme was the grocery chain of Philadelphia. If you grew up anywhere in southeastern Pennsylvania, southern New Jersey, or Delaware in the 1960s and 1970s, Acme was where your family shopped every week. The stores had full-service delis, real bakeries with fresh cookies and rye loaves, and produce departments that felt like a farmer's market. Acme employees wore white aprons and actually knew the cuts of meat behind the counter. Then the chain was acquired by American Stores in the 1980s and later folded into the Albertsons empire. The butcher department shrank to a few pre-packed cases. The bakery started carrying the same mass-produced muffins you could find at any gas station. The stores aged without renovation, and by the 2000s, anyone who compared the Acme they walked into with the Acme they remembered from 1975 would have had trouble believing it was the same company. Some Acme stores survive today, but the experience is a faded version of what it used to be. Number 11. Grand Union. Grand Union was a fixture of the northeastern United States from the 1930s through the 1980s, and in its prime it was upscale by grocery standards. Some locations had carpeted aisles. They offered full-service delis, wine sections, and produce displays that looked like they belonged in a European market hall. Grand Union wanted to be the store where upper-middle-class families did their weekly shopping, the kind of place where you felt slightly better about yourself just for being inside. And for a long time, it succeeded. Then the debt arrived. The company leveraged itself through a series of buyouts, and each round of borrowing meant another round of cuts. The carpeting went first, then the wine selection, then the quality of the produce. The stores that had once felt almost elegant started feeling like ordinary groceries that charged too much for what they offered. Grand Union filed for bankruptcy 3 separate times before finally closing for good in 2001. Number 10. IGA. IGA stands for Independent Grocers Alliance, and it was never one chain in the usual sense. It was a network of independently owned stores sharing a brand name and a group buying program. In the 1960s and 1970s, that model worked beautifully. Your local IGA was run by someone who lived in your town, sourced from nearby farms, and kept the shelves stocked because his name was on the building. The produce was fresh because the owner picked it out himself that morning. Then the big national chains moved in, and the independents started cutting corners to compete. Many switched to cheaper distributors. They stopped carrying premium brands. They let the stores go without a coat of paint for years. By the 1990s, walking into an IGA in rural America often meant walking into a store with dim lighting, sparse shelves, and lettuce that had clearly been sitting there since the middle of the previous week. Number 9. Jewel Osco. In Chicago and across Illinois, Jewel was the grocery chain. It was never glamorous, but through the 1960s and 1970s, Jewel stores ran clean operations with real bakeries, full-service delis, and meat departments where the butcher actually broke down whole sides of beef. Jewel's store brand products were considered surprisingly solid, and the chain had a quiet reputation for getting the basics right every single week. Then Jewel merged with Osco Drug in 1980, and a parade of corporate acquisitions followed. American Stores bought them. Then Albertsons bought American Stores. With each new parent company came new priorities that had less to do with the freshness of the fish behind the counter or the quality of the rye bread in the bakery. The pharmacies expanded while the grocery aisles shrank. Walking into a Jewel Osco today feels like a different experience from walking into a Jewel in 1972. The name survived. The standard it once stood for did not. Number 8. Piggly Wiggly. Piggly Wiggly invented the self-service grocery store. When Clarence Saunders opened the first location in Memphis, Tennessee in 1916, he changed the way Americans bought food. Before that, you walked into a store, handed a list to a clerk behind the counter, and he gathered your items. You never touched the products until you paid. Saunders put the goods on open shelves and let customers browse, compare, and choose for themselves. Turnstiles at the entrance, baskets for carrying, price tags on every item. It was a revolution, and it worked. For decades after that, Piggly Wiggly stores ran on the same principle of transparency and respect for the shopper. The stores were clean, the prices were posted honestly, and the meat departments had butchers who cut to order. Through the 1950s and 1960s, Piggly Wiggly was a respected name across the South and parts of the Midwest, a store your parents trusted because it had always dealt straight with them. Then the franchise model changed everything. Piggly Wiggly stopped being one company running one kind of store and became hundreds of independently owned locations using the same pig with a hat logo. Some franchise owners maintained the standard Clarence Saunders had set. Others did not. You could drive 20 minutes from one Piggly Wiggly to another in the same county and feel like you were visiting two entirely different businesses. One would have fresh meat, clean floors, and fully stocked shelves. The next would have flickering fluorescent lights, expired cans pushed to the back, and a produce bin with lettuce that had been wilting for days. The brand, built on the idea that customers deserve to see and choose their own food, became a name that depended entirely on which franchisee ran the location in your neighborhood. Piggly Wiggly stores still operate in small towns across the South today, and some of them are perfectly fine. But the consistency that once defined the name is long gone. Number 7. Pathmark. Pathmark was a powerhouse in New Jersey, New York, and parts of Pennsylvania from the late 1960s through the 1980s. The stores were large, clean, and stocked with a wide variety of goods. Pathmark's private label products were genuinely competitive with national brands, and the chain prided itself on offering real quality at lower prices. They even ran 24-hour locations, which felt radical at the time. Then the money trouble arrived. Pathmark loaded up on debt through leveraged buyouts, and when the payments came due, quality was the first thing they cut. The fresh departments shrank, store maintenance budgets vanished. Locations that had once gleamed started looking exhausted, with chipped tile floors, buzzing lights, and shelves that were never quite full. By the time A&P bought what remained of Pathmark in 2007, many of those stores were already beyond saving. When A&P itself collapsed, Pathmark went with it. Number 6. Food Lion. Food Lion's story is the one that made national television. For years, the chain was growing fast across the Southeast and Mid-Atlantic, known for low prices and convenient locations in neighborhoods where working families actually lived. Then in 1992, ABC's Primetime Live aired an undercover investigation that changed everything. Workers were filmed repackaging expired meat with new sell-by dates, washing discolored ground beef to make it look fresh, and mixing old batches with new ones. Food Lion sued ABC and initially won on the grounds of how the reporters obtained their footage. But the damage to customer trust was already done. Shoppers who had relied on Food Lion for years stopped trusting the meat counter overnight. The chain lost hundreds of millions in revenue in the years that followed. They eventually stabilized enough to keep operating, but the reputation for honest food that they had been building was destroyed in a single evening broadcast. Food Lion still runs stores across the eastern United States today, but it carries the weight of a chain that is selling on price because it lost the ability to sell on trust a long time ago. Number 5. Winn-Dixie. For decades, Winn-Dixie was the grocery chain of the Deep South. They called themselves the Beef People, and they meant it. Through the 1960s, 1970s, and into the 1980s, Winn-Dixie stores had full-service meat counters with butchers who knew the difference between a chuck roast and a blade roast and would explain it if you asked. The produce was solid. The stores were well-maintained. Shopping at Winn-Dixie in Jacksonville or Mobile or Baton Rouge was what you did if you wanted reliable groceries without paying Publix prices. You could point at a cut behind the glass and the butcher would wrap it in paper and hand it to you with a nod like you were the only customer in the store. Then the quality started slipping. Winn-Dixie expanded too fast, opened stores in marginal locations, and started cutting costs across the board. The butcher counters shrank, the buildings grew dated. By 2005, the company filed for bankruptcy with over $1 billion in debt. They closed hundreds of stores and came back as a leaner operation, but the beef people had become a slogan with nothing behind it. Number 4. Giant Food. Giant Food was a mid-Atlantic institution built by a family who opened their first store in the Washington, D.C. area in 1936. Through the 1960s and 1970s, Giant was known for quality produce, real in-store bakeries that smelled like actual bread, and a pharmacy operation that rivaled any drugstore in the neighborhood. The chain treated its workers well, and it showed in the service. Giant was where families in Maryland, Virginia, and the D.C. suburbs did their weekly shopping because it was consistently good. You could go in on a Tuesday evening after work and the shelves were full, the floors were mopped, and somebody at the deli counter asked if you needed anything sliced. Then Giant was sold to the Dutch conglomerate Ahold in 1998. The corporate changes came slowly at first, but they accumulated. The bakeries shifted from fresh to pre-made. Produce quality grew inconsistent. Store maintenance declined, and longtime employees who remembered the old standards left or were pushed out. What had been a family-run chain with a deeply loyal customer base became another corporate grocery store that looked like every other one in the parking lot. Number 3. Albertsons. Joe Albertson opened his first store in Boise, Idaho in 1939 with a simple idea. A grocery store should be a pleasant experience, not just a transaction. By the 1980s, that idea had grown into one of the largest chains in the country. The original Albertsons stores were big, clean, and properly run, with full-service delis, bakeries that baked on-site, and meat departments where the butcher would custom cut whatever you needed. Then the acquisition started. Albertsons bought Lucky Stores. They merged with American stores. They absorbed chains from coast to coast, each time inheriting locations that needed investment and attention. Instead, many of those stores got worse. House brand quality dropped. Conditions varied wildly from one location to the next. The company went through bankruptcy, got purchased by private equity, and endured another round of cost-cutting that touched everything except the executive offices. Albertsons still operates thousands of stores under various names today, but the distance between Joe Albertson's original vision and what sits on the shelves now is wide enough to push a shopping cart through. Number 2. Safeway. In the 1960s and 1970s, Safeway was one of the most trusted grocery names in America. They ran thousands of stores from coast to coast, and the Safeway standard was straightforward: clean stores, fair prices, fresh food. The bakeries baked on premises, the delis sliced to order, the produce department sourced from local and regional growers who delivered the same week the food hit the shelf. Safeway's house brands, Lucerne Dairy and Townhouse Crackers among them, were products families chose because they were good, not just because they cost less. Then came the leveraged buyout of 1986. The company was taken private under enormous debt, and that debt had to be serviced. Thousands of employees were let go. Stores that needed renovation sat untouched. Fresh departments were downsized or eliminated. The local sourcing that had kept the produce quality high was replaced by centralized distribution from warehouses hundreds of miles away. From the outside, the stores still said Safeway. Inside, the shelves told a different story. Safeway operates today under the Albertsons umbrella, and some locations are well run. But the chain that once stood for reliable American grocery shopping spent decades trading away its reputation one quarterly report at a time. Number 1. Kroger. Kroger is the biggest traditional grocery chain in America today with nearly 3,000 stores across the country. And if you shopped at a Kroger in the 1970s, you might not recognize what it has become. Back then, Kroger was a full-service grocery with real butchers behind the meat counter, bakeries that turned out fresh bread every morning, and produced sections stocked with seasonal fruits and vegetables from farms that were close enough to deliver the same day. Walking into a Kroger felt like walking into a store that genuinely cared about its food. The shift came gradually. Kroger leaned hard into private label brands, and while some of those products are perfectly fine, the overall direction moved from quality toward cost savings. Fresh departments shrank in store after store. The butcher counter became a wall of pre-packaged trays sealed in plastic. The company invested heavily in technology, loyalty programs, and fuel points, but less visibly in the actual food on its shelves. Some Kroger locations today are excellent, well-stocked stores with real variety. Others feel more like a warehouse with checkout lanes. And that inconsistency, that feeling that your grocery experience depends entirely on which zip code you happen to live in, is exactly how a quality chain quietly turns into something less. If you grew up shopping at any of these stores, you remember what they used to be. You remember the butcher who knew your order before you said it. You remember bread that smelled like it had just come out of the oven, because it had. Drop a comment and tell us which one was your store, the one that changed on you while you were still shopping there. If you know someone who remembers any of these places the way they used to be, share this video with them. And please subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this one. Thanks for watching.